Oh, you knew it was coming. You knew it was coming. You know I have to talk about my girl Taylor Swift. You know I gotta do it. So let's take a little bit of a sidestep between the metal and the prog, and let's talk about, the pop queen, the Americana sweetheart, Taylor Swift. Let's dive in.
It's me. Hi, I'm the problem. It's me.
Mightnights from Taylor Swift. So, Taylor Swift, I don't really think needs an introduction at this point. I think we all know who she is. I'm just going to at least kind of say how I got into her, because I feel like I've basically reviewed every album from her since Reputation, which still, until this day, is my favorite album from her. I think it's just so precise. It knows what it is. It goes for it. And I really like it. I like how unified all the tracks are. And I mean, it's a really good kind of concept album about the public's relations with a superstar and what that means. But then we get into the lockdown albums with Folklore and Evermore, which I love. I would say that they probably needed to be 3 albums at about 45 minutes apiece rather than 2 albums. But the thing that I really do love about Taylor Swift, and one of the main reasons why I come back to her time and time again, is just how authentic it is. And we already saw that with, as I mentioned, Reputation, as well as Lover, and within the lockdown albums. But even well before that, right from the debut self-titled and Fearless, being very homegrown country tracks, going more into the pop and accessibility side with Speak Now and Red. Red's probably my second favorite album, just by that little extra bit. And then straight into pop with 1989. So yeah, my girl has been all over the map, and this is the first album since the lockdown albums. We did have sandwiched between the lockdown albums and Mightnights, her own re-releasing albums of Red and Fearless because of reasons within the music industry that... So, coming into Mightnights. Mightnights is a little bit of an interesting album for Taylor Swift, but one that makes a lot of sense why she's releasing it. On concept, it really is a song written about and around thoughts that you have around midnight. It's those thoughts, it's those journal entries when everybody else has gone to bed and you're really just left with yourself. And you have to reflect about that. It's the parties that you have where everything's winding down and there's just a few people left over. It's the nights where you're kind of all alone and you can't quite sleep, so you have to get up and do something just to keep your mind active. Otherwise, it's going to drive you insane. It's really like that really harsh self-examination that you do at those early hours in the morning. And I really, really love the context of it because it roots the album very firmly into a real vibe, into a real atmosphere. And at times, it can feel disjointed. At times, it can feel very going from one point to another point to another point with no real clear through line. But that's really the writing sessions and the recording sessions that would have taken place in and around a 12 a.m. moments. You are jumping from thought to thought to thought. You are jumping from mood to mood to mood based on whatever it is that's bringing up. I think what happened was Taylor was starting to really develop a lot of these songs during that writing period, during the midnight hours, and realizing she has an album on her hand and starting to really chase that idea, chase that inspiration. Now, some of these work a little bit better than others. I will be the first to admit that. But I think overall, this might be one of Taylor's strongest outpours because of that very crystal clear, shining light that's leading her through it. And I can see a lot of people not really getting it, not really getting entranced because of that, because maybe they're not listening to this album properly. And I don't want to say you have to listen to an album in a certain way, but really there's a lot of albums out there that need to be consumed in a certain setting, in a certain ideal. And in Mightnights, I found the best way to listen to this album is late at night, just yourself, a pair of headphones, and just letting the music kind of wash over you, which makes the listening parties, those midnight parties, maybe not the best setting for this, or even like those late afternoons or first thing in the morning. Again, maybe not the best settings. The best time to listen to this is like 10, 11 o'clock at night after a really long day. And, all the lights are out except for those few things that you have in your apartment, and just allowing everything to kind of come into the fruition in that sense. That, I think, is the best way to listen to this album, because that was how this album was made to be listened to. It's kind of like meeting the artist on their own terms in that sense. Now, there are some tracks on here that I like more than others, and I want to get to my favorite tracks first, because I think those are the ones that will really stand out. My favorite track on this album shouldn't come as any surprise. It's number 5. If you have been a follower of Taylor Swift, if you know kind of what she's all about, the 5th spot is saved for those special tracks. And You're On Your Own, Kid really does have this special moment on the album for me. I love the gradual climb, the big blossoming of this track. It starts off very small and very somber, but then works its way into being this really beautiful and really grand track. One of the things about this album, and I'm going to use You're On Your Own, Kid as a jumping off point for this, that I really, really love about this album is how much synth and how much like keyboard works are found on this album without it really dipping into it being overproduced, oversaturated. And a lot of that, I think, has to go with the producer on this album of Jack Antonoff. Now, I know a lot of people are just like, but I don't feel that. I think Jack was doing a great job behind the production keys. And you can see that both he and Taylor Swift kind of know exactly the album that they want to get out of this. And he's allowing Taylor to really build that narrative around it. And a lot of these tracks, the centerpiece musical instrument of choice tends to be the synthesized keyboard soundscapes that we get. Now, I have heard a lot of people saying that this is kind of a response album, a foil album, a continuation album of Reputation, and I can feel that with my second favorite track of Vigilante Shit. I love this track. I love how Taylor was kind of going back into a little bit of that villain role, that self-prophesizing, you're your own worst enemy aspect, and Vigilante Shit feels like No Body, No Crime from Evermore brought into the Reputation soundscapes. It's telling this really interesting story of, what the darker side of you could do if they were just let go and just go and do your own thing. And man, I cannot help but just really love that track and just like, that's really tasty. And finally, my third favorite track off this album is the 12th track of Sweet Nothings, which I honestly feel should have been the last track. Like, I feel like the 13th track of Mastermind, 14th, which is my fourth favorite track off of this album. I think Mastermind should have been the second last track, and Sweet Nothing should have been the final track off of here. And I know people will disagree with me, but here's why. Because Mastermind sets up as, I might look like I'm the sweet, innocent girl. I might feel like, bad things have been done to me and I had no part in it, or, all these different things. But really, at the end of the day, I'm the big mastermind behind all this. I'm the one that's orchestrating all these things. I'm the one with the big, long play in my head that I'm seeking as my own self gratification. And musically, it does kind of have this menacing flavor to it that, I don't know, it's a little bit of a counterculture that Taylor was doing specifically with Reputation that she's kind of like admitting to more so here. But I love how it's being presented with more of an optimistic side of things. Some of the soundscapes that we would have had with like 1989 and being a little bit more fun, a little bit more lighthearted in that case. So it's an odd stop point for this album, even though it does serve as kind of like the main thesis for a lot of the themes that Taylor has woven throughout this entire album. I still think that Sweet Nothing is a much better capper offer because it's It's these moments that you share with individuals, these sweet little nothings that in the end, like in the moment, it doesn't seem like a whole lot, but in the grand scheme of things, they're the things that you think about much later on in your life. And it ends on a little bit more of an optimistic side of things, especially musically. It's a little bit more subdued. It's a lot more intimate. It's a lot more connecting with the audience. Whereas Mastermind, I feel, is a little bit more of an alienation. It's a little bit more of an isolating track for Taylor by kind of doing this bait and switch kind of an action. So yeah, I still love Sweet Nothing, and I think that it should have been kind of the last track. So that's kind of what I'm really, really loving on here. A lot of the other tracks, Lavender Haze, I love. Antihero is a really, really great track. Question and Labyrinth were really, really fun. I did want to talk a little bit about Snow on the Beach, which features Lana Del Rey. With the last two albums of Evermore and Folklore, you could tell that Taylor was really channeling the Lana Del Rey sound and the Lana Del Rey vibes. And it was only inevitable after those two albums for Lana and Taylor to come together and work on something. And this is the only feature that Taylor has on this album. And I have to say, I was a little underwhelmed. You know, I don't hear Lana at all in the mix. I was really hoping for Lana to have a full verse or chorus on here. And instead, she's kind of pushed a little bit to the back in terms of her presence on the performance, just into the background, into the harmonizations, and Taylor is really the lead star on here. You know, you can still feel the Lana vibes, but you could also feel the Lana vibes on a lot of the other Taylor tracks. If I had to pick out some duds, because I will have to admit, there are some tracks on here that I'm less than excited for. Karma was one that I could kind of do without. I'm not the biggest fan of this track. And Midnight Rain, I'm left with more questions than answers. I'm not a big fan of how Taylor is down-tuning her voice on this artificially to make it sound much more deep. I'm not the biggest fan of this production work. I don't know quite what she and Antonoff were thinking when doing this. It doesn't really help to serve the song, and it just kind of sticks out with a sore thumb, and it's not the only time that this happens. The last couple tracks, like Antihero and Bejeweled, they're fun, they're great, they're tracks I'll be looking at again and again, and in fact, Antihero, I got myself pretty emotional over because yeah, there are times when I really need to listen to this song because, yep, it's definitely the you are your own worst enemy. And it's that in personification on this track. So in the end, I will say that Mightnights on the one hand is a little bit of a mixed grab bag, but I think that's exactly what you're going to get with the concept of a lot of these tracks being written for a late night, you are with yourself as a very honest conversation with yourself. You can hear that mirrored with a lot of the lyrics, like, I would rather stare at the sun than look at myself in the mirror, and this is basically forcing you to do so. I think this holds some of the most mature tracks that Taylor has ever put out. It has some of the most heartfelt tracks on it, but I also don't think it has anything that will really wow people and critics, you know? Like, I don't think that there's any really big bops that we had on here that we would have had from Lover or we would have had from 1989 or even Reputation. But I don't think that that really serves as a negative in my mind. This is much more of a start to finish album rather than a collection of bops, a collection of singles. And in that case, that's why I really, really do love this album. It might be, at the end of the day, one of my favorite releases from Taylor Swift. So, yeah, which is why I think I will say Mightnights from Taylor Swift is an album I will absolutely pick up in physical format. I think this is also a great introduction to her music. You know, each album is very, very different. You can't really say that Taylor puts out the same album over and over and over again. She always takes risks. She always tries something new. And I think this is an album that I think in the long run will service her well, because this is an album I think you will need to spend some time with, you'll need to digest and really get into, and as a prog fan, I am very used to doing that, so that came second nature to me as I was listening to it. The first couple listens, I was like, not really getting a whole lot out of it. upon 5th, 6th, 7th listen, the more I listen to it, the more I get out of it. And that is exactly what I want with a good, solid album. Also, this album's only about 45 minutes long, and that is the perfect runtime for an album like this. I wish more artists would do this instead of trying to fill up all the space on a CD, which don't really sell anymore, especially on streaming sites. Limit yourself and give yourself that extra room to breathe, because it will pay dividends in the end. So there you go. Those are my thoughts about Mightnights. What did you guys think about this album? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Whatever you thought, please let me know by commenting down below. And I think that's all I've got for you guys today. Yeah, that's all I've got. So thank you all so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.